They came without warning and without sound. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the great ships appeared over every major city on Earth, hanging motionless in the sky like silver clouds that refused to move. New York, London, Moscow, Beijing, Cape Town, Delhi, each city received its own vessel, a craft so immense that its shadow darkened entire boroughs. No rockets fired. No landing gear deployed. They simply hovered, silent and absolute, and the world beneath them stopped. Traffic halted. Markets crashed. Churches filled. Within 48 hours, every government on Earth had attempted contact and received nothing. Then, on the third day, the voice came. It spoke in flawless English over every radio frequency simultaneously, calm and unhurried, as though it had been waiting for us to exhaust our panic before it introduced itself. The voice said its name was Carl Len. He called himself the supervisor of Earth. Carl Len would speak only to Ricky Stormgren, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and only through a one-way screen aboard his ship. Stormgren could hear the voice but never see the face. For 5 years, this arrangement held. Carl Len delivered his instructions with quiet authority: dismantle your weapons, end your wars, abolish cruelty. He did not threaten. He simply demonstrated consequences. When South Africa resisted desegregation, the sun above the country went dark for half an hour. When a rogue state tested a nuclear weapon, the missile reversed course in midair and buried itself harmlessly in empty desert. The Overlords, as humanity began to call them, possessed technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from divine power. And yet Carl Len refused to show himself. When Stormgren asked why, the voice behind the screen said only, "You are not ready." Over the years, Stormgren developed something close to friendship with the invisible Carl Len. Their conversations ranged from philosophy to chess, from the governance of empires to the nature of trust. Stormgren sensed a deep weariness in his guardian, an ancient patience born from having performed this duty countless times before. When a radical group called the Freedom League kidnapped Stormgren to protest alien rule, Carl Len recovered him within hours, without violence or drama. Before Stormgren retired from his post, he made one final attempt to see behind the screen. He smuggled a device aboard Corellan's ship to glimpse the supervisor's form. What he saw for a fraction of a second was enough to keep him silent for the rest of his life. He told no one. He understood now why Carl Len had waited. Under the Overlord's rule, Earth entered an era of unprecedented peace. Poverty vanished within a decade. Disease was conquered. Crime became so rare it was almost folkloric. Every citizen received education, shelter, and comfort that prior generations could not have imagined. Racial hatred, religious violence, and national borders dissolved with an ease that seemed miraculous. The old religions withered not from persecution but from irrelevance. When beings from the stars governed your world, the parochial gods of desert prophets lost their hold. Humanity had dreamed of utopia for 10,000 years, and an alien civilization had simply handed it over as though it were nothing more complicated than a gift. The cities grew clean and beautiful. The oceans healed. The air itself tasted different. For the first generation born under the Overlords, suffering existed only in history books, a quaint and terrible abstraction. And yet something was wrong. The Golden Age had a price that could not be measured in currency or counted in casualties, and 50 years would pass before anyone understood what had been lost. The great irony of paradise was that it killed ambition. When every need was met and every danger removed, the engines of human creativity began to stall. Art became decorative rather than urgent. Music grew pleasant but forgettable. No one wrote the great novel because there was nothing left to struggle against. Scientific research continued but only as an intellectual hobby. The Overlords had already solved every problem humanity was working toward. Space programs were quietly discontinued. Why explore the stars when your guardians had already mapped them? Athletics declined. Birth rates dropped. The world was comfortable, well-fed, and profoundly bored. Humanity had traded its restlessness for safety, its fire for warmth, and the bargain was slowly killing something essential in the species that no medical scan could detect. 50 years after their arrival, the Overlords finally agreed to show themselves. The event was broadcast worldwide. When the great door of Corellan's ship opened and he stepped into the sunlight for the first time, a gasp rippled across the planet. Standing before the cameras was an enormous being, over 7 feet tall, with dark reddish-black skin that gleamed like polished obsidian. Massive leathery bat-like wings folded behind his broad back, spanning 12 feet when partially extended. 2 thick, curving ram-like horns swept back from his heavy brow. A long, muscular tail ending in a barbed fork curled behind him. His feet were cloven hooves that rang against the metal ramp. His eyes were large, golden, and ancient beyond reckoning. Carl Len looked exactly like the Western image of the devil. And for the first time, the world understood why he had waited 50 years. Had he appeared on that first day, humanity would have greeted him not with wonder but with terror, with holy war, with nuclear fire. He had waited until the old religions had faded, until the fear had been bred out of the species by 2 generations of peace. Even so, millions wept. The resemblance was not a coincidence, but it was not what anyone expected. Carl Len explained that humanity's image of the devil was not a memory of the Overlords but a premonition. The collective unconscious had somehow reached forward through time, sensing the arrival of these beings thousands of years before they came, and had encoded that vision in myth, in religion, in nightmare. The devil was not a warning about the past but an echo from the future. This revelation shattered what remained of conventional theology. The horns, the wings, the cloven hooves, all of it was prophecy, not history. Humanity had been dreaming about the Overlords for millennia without knowing it. And if the racial memory could run backwards through time, what else might the human mind be capable of perceiving? This was the question the Overlords themselves had come to answer. It began with the Gregson family. Jeffrey, the youngest son, started having dreams that were not dreams. He would describe in perfect detail events happening on the other side of the world, disasters that had not yet occurred, places no human had ever seen. Then the objects began to move. A glass lifted off the table and hovered for 30 seconds while the family watched in frozen silence. His sister Jennifer followed soon after, her eyes sometimes focusing on distances that had nothing to do with the room she occupied. Within a year, reports of similar cases emerged from every continent, children under 10 exhibiting telekinesis, telepathy, and forms of perception that defied every known model of consciousness. The Overlords did not seem surprised. They had been waiting for this. They had always been waiting for this. Not everyone accepted the golden cage. A community called New Athens was established on an island, dedicated to preserving human creativity and independence. Artists, musicians, scientists, and philosophers gathered there in a deliberate act of cultural resistance. They believed that the Overlord's paradise was a spiritual prison, that comfort without struggle produced a species not worth saving. For a time, New Athens thrived. Original works of art were created there that had not been seen on the mainland in decades. But even this last outpost could not hold back what was coming. The children of New Athens began changing too. The transformation was not political or cultural. It was biological. It was evolutionary. And it did not ask for consent. The Overlords finally revealed the truth they had carried across the stars. They were not conquerors. They were not liberators. They were servants of an entity they called the Overmind, a cosmic intelligence of staggering scope, a vast collective consciousness that spanned galaxies and existed partially outside of time itself. The Overmind was not a god in any theological sense, it was the next phase of mental evolution, the destination toward which all sentient species either ascended or perished. Certain races, at certain moments in their development, produced children capable of joining this collective. The Overlords had been dispatched as midwives, to protect the species during the dangerous transition, to prevent the birth pangs from destroying the world before the new consciousness could emerge. They had performed this duty for thousands of races across millions of years. The children changed. It happened over months, then weeks, then days. They stopped speaking. They stopped eating. They stood together in great silent gatherings, thousands of them, then millions, their eyes open but focused on something no adult could perceive. Their bodies became irrelevant. Their minds were fusing into a single awareness that was no longer human in any recognizable sense. Parents watched in helpless anguish as their sons and daughters ceased to respond, ceased to recognize them, ceased to be individuals at all. The children did not die. Something far stranger occurred. They became one mind, one vast intelligence that was learning to flex itself against the fabric of reality. The earth began to tremble. Oceans shifted. The planet itself was being consumed, its matter and energy converted into fuel for the ascending consciousness. Humanity's children were being born into something magnificent, and the birth was destroying the world. Jan Rodrix had been the boldest of the last generation. He had stowed away aboard an Overlord supply ship decades earlier, traveling 40 light-years to their home world and back. Due to relativistic effects, he returned to find 80 years had passed on Earth while only months had elapsed for him. He was the last adult human alive. The world he came home to was unrecognizable, silent cities, empty streets, a planet slowly dissolving as the children's collective consciousness drew energy from its core. Jan broadcast his observations back to the Overlord ship, describing in a steady voice what he saw: the ground cracking, the sky changing color, continents buckling, the atmosphere itself beginning to thin. He did not panic. He had volunteered for this witness. In his final transmission, he described a pillar of light rising from the earth, the children ascending at last into the Overmind. Then the planet was gone. Jan Rodrix was gone. Humanity, as a biological species, was finished. The Overlords watched from orbit as the Earth dissolved into light. Carl Len stood at the observation window of his vessel, his great wings folded, his ancient golden eyes reflecting the death of a world he had shepherded for a century. He had seen this before. He would see it again. This was their function and their curse. For the Overlords possessed a devastating limitation: they could never undergo the transformation themselves. Their species was a dead end, mentally brilliant but forever locked out of transcendence. They could study it, facilitate it, protect the fragile species approaching it, but they could never experience what the children had experienced. They were the eternal midwives, endlessly attending births they could never share. Carl Len, ancient beyond measure, looked down at the space where Earth had been and felt the same quiet grief he had felt 1,000 times before. The tragedy of the Overlords was not cruelty or malice. It was that they understood exactly what they were missing, and they would carry that understanding to the end of time.